Part 17. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn. I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 176. Shen Yu saw the excitement shining in his eyes in the darkness, but she didn't expect Xie to be so good at it. She raised her feet and kicked off, but Xie grabbed her and pulled her back, locking her behind her waist. The sound of a crackling fight echoed in the room. The guards at the entrance of the courtyard heard the commotion and looked at each other with a smile. It seems the conversation has broken down. You can still laugh, another guard said. We were the ones who let him in. If you ask me later, you will have to settle the score with us. Just say you can't stop him. He is the crown prince of Balin and a third-rank official. How can we, the little guards, stop him? The man rubbed his chin. Did you stop it? Did you stop it? Don't talk about me. You also wanted to watch the fun, so you didn't stop me. There was a clang in the house, and something broke. The two guards listened carefully and did not move. It was so loud. My lord did not dare to make a killing move while I was blocking him, otherwise I would have cut the prince out with two swords. Xie listened intently and bent one of Shen Yu's legs on her chest. They guessed wrong. They didn't know that my grandma is so cruel. How dare she kick her there? Shen Yu was ashamed of this gesture. Hurry up and let go. How can everything go according to your wishes? Xie said slowly. Who asked you to bite me? He rolled his lips lightly with the tip of his tongue and tasted the smell of blood. Tisk. You are so willing to bite, Xie said. Shen Yu hesitated to speak, but he kept kissing her, and his body had a slight tendency to raise his head, so she could only bite him, but the bite was a bit harsh. If you don't let me go, I won't let you go anymore, Shen Yu warned. Xie laughed. I want to see what it's like if you don't let me go. After saying that, he struck first, grabbed her waist, turned her over violently, and held her hand behind her back. The wound on Shen Yu's arm hurt so much that she buried her head in the pillow and gritted her teeth without daring to cry out about the pain. Xie discovered something unusual. Her body was shaking slightly, and she looked like she was in unbearable pain. Xie quickly let go of her, turned her over and hugged her, and said nervously, What's wrong? Does it hurt you? Where does it hurt? Shen Yu closed her eyes and rested her forehead on his shoulder. It's okay, I just twisted it and it's fine. Let me take a look. Xie grabbed her arm and flipped it open. Her whole body suddenly stopped moving. Shen Yu knew she couldn't hide it anymore. Like a quail, she rested her head on his neck and remained motionless. I'm telling you, Xie snorted coldly, why haven't you left the palace these days? You are the one who hurt me. You don't dare to see me, right? Shen Yu murmured, what do you mean by someone who hurts you? It's obviously me who hurts me. You are not mine, Xie asked. He got up and lit a lamp and placed it in the window so that the shadow would not be reflected. Are you going to show it to me yourself or should I check it? He stood back by the bed. Shen Yu blinked and slowly handed over her left hand. It's been bandaged. Have you changed your dressing today? Changed. Xie looked at her for a moment, obviously not convinced. Let me take a look. After the gauze was untied, the atmosphere in the room became a little more depressing, and Shen Yu felt that it was a little difficult to breathe. Where are the medicine and gauze? Shen Yu pointed to the cabinet next to her. Xie said nothing and concentrated on changing her dressing. Shen Yu tried to lighten the mood. With your expression on your face, if you go out like this in a while, you won't even have to act. Seeing that Xie ignored her, Shen Yu added, actually, I rode this myself. Xie paused and raised his eyelids to glance at her. Shen Yu whispered, I seem to have seen my brother. Xie whose mind was spinning rapidly, the assassin last night. If she hadn't suspected it was her brother, she would definitely not have scratched herself with a knife. Shen Yu nodded and said, one of the martial arts moves is very similar to my brother, but his body shape is slimmer, so I didn't recognize him at first. It's possible that the body was not found, Xieting Zhou said while bandaging the wound. I didn't dare to think in this direction before, because I felt that if my brother was alive, he would definitely come to me. Shen Yu added, you asked me where I ran to. I left the palace and asked shopkeeper Lu to help me find out. Xieting Zhou said, I'll let Zifeng make arrangements tomorrow. Shen Yu thought for a moment and said, you can send someone to keep an eye on the Teifu's mansion. My brother likes Miss Yu's family, and he may go to see her. Yes, Xieting Zhou wrapped the wound, gently touched the gauze with his fingertips, and said softly, there will be another scar. Do you dislike it? I have many scars on my body, Shen Yu asked cautiously. Xieting Zhou breathed out, hugged her from behind, and gently supported her arm. Every time I see you injured, I feel very bad. Once I feel bad, I want to kill someone. What should I do? Can I coax you? Xieting Zhou lowered his eyelids and looked at her. How to coax her? Shen Yu looked around and saw that the place where the guest rested was very simple and there was nothing. The only valuable thing around her was the yin feng, but she was reluctant to use it to coax him. Xieting Zhou smiled watching her actions. What a smart yet stupid girl, she thinks that she can only give away what she thinks is the best to others, but she doesn't know that she is the best. I haven't thought about it yet. Shen Yu heard his smile. How about, you should tell me first who you are going to kill if you kill someone. Xieting Zhou really followed her lead and thought seriously for a moment, as if deciding who would die first. After a while, he said, Zhangji. Shen Yu turned around, then let's stop coaxing him and kill him directly. Xieting Zhou pressed her temples from behind. I can't stay too long, I have to leave. Shen Yu was a little reluctant to leave. The breath, the taste, and the embrace behind her that was so hot that it made people feel a little hot in the summer night, all made people reluctant to let go. Tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow at the latest, you must leave the palace. The house has been found for you. It is too big and unsuitable. The house at the end of Yongqing Lane on Qingxi Street is in the small courtyard. It's relatively quiet. Liu Yao and Arya have already moved over and are waiting for you. Xieting Zhou walked to the door, looked back and said, Master Shi, don't you want to see me off? Shen Yu jumped out of bed, ran over and pounced on him. Xieting Zhou was pushed back by her force and slammed into the door. The soft touch on his lips flashed past. He smiled and lowered his head, whispering softly, my wife is as strong as an ox, she is so mighty. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince author, Gigi. Chapter 177. Xieting Zhou opened the door under her glare and left calmly facing the guard's gaze. Did you see the injury on the prince's lip? One person raised his chin. Another said, obviously, the overlord is forcing his bow. Then you said it was successful or not? Of course. You too. Shen Yu held the door, come here. The guard hurried over and said, Sir. Shen Yu spoke softly, who let him in? The guard said, Sir, we can't stop it, and we don't dare to stop it either. Don't let him come here again. Shen Yu closed the door forcefully. Of course it didn't work. The guard quietly continued what he had left unfinished before, look at the adults, they are all beard and tail, and the clothes on their bodies are still neatly dressed. It has rained intermittently in Shengjing for the past 2 days. The stone roads in the alleys were worn and uneven, and the moon was trapped in the puddles in the night. A man in grey clothes was walking in the alley, wearing a bamboo hat and carrying a medicine bag. He didn't stop when he reached the door of his house. Instead, he turned at the end of the alley and turned into another alley. He hides in the dark, and when he hears a subtle sound, he strikes out at the person like lightning. Just as he was about to meet the person in front of him, Shen Zhao's expression changed when he saw the other person's face. He deflected the blade and narrowly missed the person's temple, shaving off a few strands of hair. Why don't you know how to hide? Shen Zhao was shocked and angry. He was not masked tonight. Shen Yu stared blankly at Shen Zhao's face, and 2 lines of tears rolled down unexpectedly. Elder brother. She wanted to pounce on it, but she was afraid that everything in front of her was just an illusion and that it would break if she moved. Shen Zhao sighed, let's go into the house and talk. He turned around and went back to the door he had just passed. Before entering, he looked around carefully to make sure no one was there before opening the door. Shen Yu followed closely and heard someone talking in the room. Is it the master? Yes, Shen Zhao raised his voice and replied, then said to Shen Yu, it's Kong Cheng. He was injured that night in the palace. We left separately at that time. He only came back 2 days ago. Wait for me in that room. Shen Zhao pointed to a room, entered the room and put the medicine. When I came out, I saw Shen Yu standing at the door with her head lowered, raising her arms from time to time, silently wiping tears. The little girl is still like that, she doesn't know how to speak when she feels hurt, and she doesn't know how to make a sound when she cries. She just sheds tears silently and keeps the pain in her heart. Shen Zhao felt sour in his heart and said, Auntie, come over to my brother's place. He opened his arms. Shen Yu pursed her lips, held back her sobs, and walked over slowly. Shen Zhao hugged her back and looked up at the bright moon. The moon is full and the moon is full. With my father gone, they are the only brothers and sisters left in this world to depend on each other. It was his brother who did not do well. Before his mother passed away, he promised to take good care of his sister, but instead he made her practice martial arts and expose her to the wind and sun all day long in the harsh north wind at the border. Before her father passed away, he drugged Kono and asked her to take her away, but she ran back without hesitation and wanted to fight alongside them. She was only 17, and he had left her alone for so long, letting her walk alone in this chaos. I'm sorry for you, brother. Shen Zhao choked with sobs. He endured it, but couldn't. Tears fell from his cheeks into her hair. Shen Yu shook her head, as long as you live, I just want you to live. She was not sad, she was filled with joy and joy of reunion, but she could not hold back her tears. Shen Zhao let her tears wet his clothes and coaxed her and patted her back as before. When she stopped sobbing, Shen Zhao let her go, wiped the corners of her eyes with his thumb, smiled and said, why do you still cry so much? I rarely cry now. Shen Yu wiped away her tears, I only cry easily when I go to see my dad. Shen Zhao rubbed her hair and said, she's grown taller. Shen Yu suddenly remembered, brother, have you gone to visit dad's grave? Shen Zhao went into the room to pour tea. Yes, I'm going. He smiled bitterly, as long as I live in this world, I had no face to see him, but... No, Shen Yu interrupted him and said seriously, Dad must hope that you live a good life, just be normal. Shen Zhao handed the tea to her, what about you? Since you know that Dad wants us to be ordinary, why would we take such a risk? Shen Yu pursed her lips and said, it's not as dangerous as you think. Isn't it dangerous? Shen Zhao said solemnly, what do you want to do by risking yourself and going deep into the tiger's den? I want to find out the truth about the defeat at Yanliangwen and bring justice to my father and the 100,000 soldiers. This is what a man should do. Why do you, a little girl, have a hand in it? Shen Zhao said. Shen Yu said, I am also my father's daughter, and you didn't raise me as a girl. How dare you talk back? Shen Yu shrank her neck and said cautiously, brother, it's almost over. The 2 scapegoats, Liangji Unfang and Ji Liangji, are dead, but the people behind them are still alive and well. Shen Zhao's eyes were sharp, I have to kill Emperor Tongxiu. Shen Yu said, I'm afraid this matter is different from what we expected. I originally thought it was because my father was so powerful that he killed the donkey with Emperor Su, but later I found out that it was not the case. The water here is too deep. Shen Zhao looked at her quietly. In less than a year, she has grown so fast. She can fight generals with a sword, and can outwit civil servants in planning. He was happy in his heart, but also felt distressed. Shen Yu talked for a long time before she explained the whole story clearly. Shen Zhao frowned and poured her a glass of water. Have you ever thought about what would happen if Emperor Tongxue insisted on protecting the prince? Then I will do it myself, Shen Yu said, and... She suddenly froze. Shen Zhao looked at her. What is it? Oops, Shen Yu suddenly stood up. I forgot there was someone else. Who? It's Prince Balin. Shen Yu hurriedly ran out of the yard and whispered into the dark alley, are you still there? Hello. I thought you had forgotten that there was a person like me. Xieting Zhou walked out of the darkness, lowered his head and approached her face, and asked, why are you crying like this? Your eyes are swollen. He stretched out his hand to touch it, but Shen Yu immediately took a step back to avoid it, and glanced back from the corner of her eyes to remind him. Xieting Zhou smiled and looked at Shen Zhao, who was standing not far behind her. General Shen, I have long admired him. The Prince of Balin, I have admired your name for a long time. Shen Yu laughed dryly, well, then there's no need for me to introduce you. Shen Zhao raised his hand, Your Majesty, please. Xieting Zhou glanced sideways at Shen Yu and walked over, don't worry, General Shen. The surrounding area has been cleared and no one will eavesdrop. Your Majesty, you are good at what you do. Excellent. Shen Yu's eyes moved back and forth between the two of them, always feeling that the atmosphere was a bit subtle. What are you looking at? Shen Zhao asked first. Shen Yu said, how come you two feel like thunder from the sky is stirring up fire on the earth? Xieting Zhou's eyes were complicated, who did you learn this term from? Li Jifeng or Pei Chunli? Isn't that how it works? Shen Yu asked blankly, I mean you two have a little. That's called the tip of a needle facing the wheat, Xieting Zhou reminded her. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Treating the Concubine, Eliminating the Wife, Reborn, I Refuse to Marry the Scumbag and Marry the Prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 178. Shen Yu said oh, and when she saw Shen Zhao looking at her seriously, she hurriedly said, Brother, when the Crown Prince led troops to rescue Yanliang Pass, Emperor Tongxue recruited him into the capital as a hostage. I followed him into the capital. I wanted to use him to find out the truth, so I worked as a guard by his side for a while. Shen Zhao noticed that Shen Yu kept referring to him as him. She had no sense of being a subordinate and no respect at all. Instead, she seemed to have a close relationship. His mind moved slightly, your relationship with the Crown Prince seems to be very close. Shen Yu, actually, it's just average. Xieting Zhou, this is natural. The two said in unison. Shen Yu closed her eyes and stepped on Xieting Zhou's feet under the table. Shen Zhao turned around and asked, why are you stepping on me? Shen Yu was stunned, huh? She bent down and looked under the table, raised her head and said, why do you stretch your legs so far? Shen Zhao looked at her, let me ask you first, why are you stepping on me? Xieting Zhou looked at Shen Yu gloatingly, with a frivolous smile on his lips. Oh, Shen Yu said, I just wanted to stretch my legs, but who knew I would step on you? Xieting Zhou said with a smile, when you lie, don't roll your eyes. This girl has been like this since she was a child. Shen Zhao said to Xieting Zhou, if you feel guilty, your eyes won't stop moving. You. He stopped talking because he also noticed something was wrong. Shen Zhao coughed lightly, thanks to the Crown Prince for taking great care of Au during these days. If you need Shen Zhao in the future, feel free to mention it. In the future. Xieting Zhou protracted his tone, looked at Shen Yu and said, "Of course there is something to mention." Only Shen Yu understood his eyes and what he meant. Shen Zhao was stunned for a moment. Normal people would refuse politely, saying that such a small effort is of no consequence. How could he be so rude when it falls on Xie Ting's head? "First, let's get down to business." Shen Yu changed the subject with a guilty conscience. "Today Su Yishan, the minister of the Ministry of Punishment, reported to the emperor. Marquis Xianping took the blame and said it was all his fault. Does the dog emperor believe it?" Shen Zhao was still quite critical of Emperor Tongxiu. Shen Yu said, "He probably didn't believe it. If he wanted to protect the people behind Xianping Hao, he could just close the case. But he issued a death order for Su Yishan, and we must conduct a thorough investigation to find out the people behind it." Shen Zhao frowned tightly. Xianping Ho refused to speak. Isn't the answer already obvious? The prince is his nephew. Who else can let him maintain this point besides the prince? "I'm afraid Emperor Tongxiu is thinking of deposing the crown prince," Shen Yu said solemnly. "Now he needs a reasonable reason to depose the crown prince. But if Marquis Xianping doesn't give this reason, isn't there any other way?" Shen Yu said, "The crown prince is the foundation of a country, and it is the foundation of the country. Nowadays, it is different from the past. At this time, any slight disturbance can cause big waves. People who are about to die are also bolder. They did not dare to do things in the past. Maybe I'm willing to give it a try. But Emperor Tongxiu is at the end of his life. As long as Marquis Xianping doesn't get involved with the prince and the prince succeeds to the throne after Emperor Tongxiu's funeral, Marquis Xianping will still have a chance to survive. Perhaps this is why Marquis Xianping refuses to speak. Reason. Drink some water to moisten your throat first." Xie Tingzhou poured tea and handed it to her. "Drink less cold tea at night." Shen Yu said took a few sips and put it down. The tacit understanding between the two is not like that of superiors or subordinates, nor is it like ordinary friends. Shen Zhao saw this and his eyes gradually deepened. "We have to find a way to get Marquis Xianping to speak," Shen Yu said. Shen Zhao was pulled back from his thoughts. "Under severe punishment, I am not afraid that he will not do anything. He has a hereditary title and the Ministry of Punishment does not dare to torture him." Shen Yu's face was gloomy. Xie Tingzhou moved the teacup with his fingertips again. "Don't you think it's strange?" The two of them looked at each other at the same time. Xie Tingzhou said, "There are several unreasonable things that we have ignored. There are more than one inconsistencies. The suppression of bandits at the beginning. After the suppression of bandits failed, you escorted people back to Beijing without encountering any obstacles for half a day. You also said that maybe the other party is deliberately waiting for them to come to the capital, but it cannot be that Marquis Xianping is waiting for them to come to the capital to identify himself." Shen Yu nodded. "I thought so at first." Xie Tingzhou put his fingertips on the table. "There is another extra person, Qi Wan. At first they were trying to silence him, but in the end they let Qi Wan persuade Gui Xiong. Don't you think this step is unnecessary?" "When you say that, it seems so." Shen Yu and Xie Tingzhou looked at each other, "but the evidence is conclusive. The person who smuggled the official grain is indeed Marquis Xianping." Xie Tingzhou slowly frowned. "It seems that there is a person who is constantly changing his direction as the situation changes. Soldiers come to block him, water comes to cover him, and he never falls behind. Does the prince have such a plan?" Shen Zhao interjected, "Which prince doesn't have a lot of staff? Maybe there's an expert behind the scenes." After thinking about it over and over again, Shen Yu felt that something was wrong, but she couldn't figure it out for the moment. After talking late into the night, Shen Zhao sent the two of them to the door. Shen Yu opened the door and reluctantly said, "Brother, I live in the house at the end of Yongqing Lane on Qingxi Street. If you need anything, just go and find me there. Liu Yao will find a way to notify me. I am the one with the green medicine." Xie Tingzhou said calmly, "General Shen can contact me directly." Shen Zhao said, I am no longer a general. Just call me by my first name. Brother Shen doesn't need to call me the eldest son, just call me Tingzhou like Au Xie Tingzhou said. Shen Zhao nodded, then frowned for a moment. Auntie. Stop the boat? Is this how they usually call each other by their first names? Let's go, brother Shen Yu waved her hand and looked back 3 times. Well, go ahead. Shen Zhao stood at the entrance of the courtyard and watched the two walking 5 or 6 feet apart, but they didn't seem to be very close. Strange, Shen Zhao closed the courtyard door suspiciously. Turning around the alley, Xie Tingzhou glanced sideways at Shen Yu. Are you afraid of your brother? Is it obvious? Shen Yu asked. You are 8 feet away from me. You want to stick it to the wall. Is it obvious or not? Don't you have a clue in your own mind? Xie Tingzhou snorted lightly. Shen Yu could tell from his hum that he was telling the truth. She glanced back to make sure Shen Zhao hadn't followed, then moved over and pinched Xie Tingzhou's fingers hidden under his sleeves. He mumbled, my brother doesn't know about our relationship yet. What is our relationship? Xie Tingzhou asked deliberately. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince author, Gigi. Chapter 179. Shen Yu tilted her head to look at him, not knowing what to say. He asked this on purpose. Shen Yu thought so in her heart and loosened her grip. Xie Tingzhou clasped her hand in his palm with his backhand, and asked in a bad tone, am I shameful? Shen Yu wondered, my brother would scold me to death. He once told me that girls should be more reserved and not be careless like me. Aren't you reserved enough? Xie Tingzhou seemed to be complaining, I'm the one who loves you like the stars and the moon, but I haven't been able to marry you yet. How can you keep me reserved for 10 or 8 years? Shen Yu couldn't help but laugh, patted his arm and comforted him, now is not the time. I will find a chance to talk to him. Besides what? Besides, marriage can't be so hasty. Shen Yu was a little thin-skinned. Xie Tingzhou's eyes softened, of course I can't bear to wrong you. I have asked my father to make preparations in Bailin. He stopped and asked Shen Yu to face him, with an extremely serious tone, Au, when things are over, I will take you back to Bailin. We will get married in Bailin. I can't wait any longer. You don't know how to embroider the wedding dress. I have already asked people to start preparing it. 80 embroiderers will prepare it. When we return to Bailin, the wedding dress should be ready. I want to give you the best. Now that your eldest brother is back, you are no longer alone. He will carry you out of the cabinet, and I will take you from him. I don't want the throne anymore. Let's build a courtyard in the north and live there together. Where do you want to go? After playing, I will accompany you. Shen Yu raised her head slightly and looked at him. He said a lot, and they all sounded so good, but could he go back? How can you allow others to sleep soundly on the side of the couch? Balin is the sharp blade hanging over the king's head, and Xie Tingzhou is the scabbard that restrains Balin. The king put him under his nose. No matter who sat on the dragon throne, the sword always existed. Xie Tingzhou understood her so well that he could see the worries in her heart with just one look. Don't be afraid. Xie Tingzhou hugged her under the moonlight and whispered in his ear, if I want to leave, no one can stop me. At worst, it will be a fight to the death. Don't be afraid, I will take you home. Shen Yu leaned on his shoulder and looked at the clear light falling on the ground. She has always avoided thinking about Xie Tingzhou's ending in her previous life, but she fell into nightmares again and again when the end of Emperor Tongxiu was approaching. She dreamed that he was standing in the palace gate covered in blood, holding out his hand, one step away from the palace gate, but in the end he could not get out of the prison. Shen Yu closed her eyes, shuddered suddenly, and tightened her arms around him. Xie Tingzhou kissed her temples and comforted her over and over again, don't be afraid, auntie, Don't be afraid, I'm here. Today the three Dharma ministers gathered at Dali Temple to discuss matters. It was dusk when Suyishan and Cao Hong came out of Dali Temple. Look at their attitude, Cao Hong said sternly. Dali Temple is trying to make peace and throw all the burden on our criminal department. No matter what the outcome of this case is, it will be futile. They are trying to take out Dali Temple, and no matter what happens, it will fall on us. Suyishan said calmly, this is good, at least it can prove that Dali Temple did not collude with them, and we can let go when trying the case without being constrained by others. But this case has been delayed for almost a month, Cao Hong said anxiously. Your Majesty gave us only half a month left in the deadline. In the past 3 days, Marquis Xianping uttered 2 words in total, which was to ask for water. This is a decision not to say anything and to fight to the end. The title of Marquis Xianping hasn't been removed yet, and we can't even go to jail. The Ministry of Punishment is caught in the middle. It's really hard to be a good person inside and outside. Suyishan let out a long sigh. I'll report it to the Emperor and see what your Majesty says. The two of them had just entered the palace. A gorgeous carriage drove up at the gate of the palace. Looking at the sign hanging on the eaves of the carriage, the two knew that the person coming was the King of Qi, so they stepped aside to give way. King Qi's carriage stopped in front of the two men. Li Yanchang lifted the car curtain. Are you two adults going to the palace to meet the saint? The two of them bowed and saluted, and Suyishan said, that's right. King Qi, please go first. Well, Li Yanchang just lowered the curtain, but then opened it again. Then Marquis Xianping hasn't done anything yet. Cases from the Ministry of Punishment cannot be spread outside the case before they are concluded, so Suyishan naturally would not speak. Li Yanchang smiled understandingly. I see Mr. Su frowning. He must be worried about this matter, right? I have an idea. I wonder if the two adults are willing to listen. Suyishan thought for a moment and realized that there had been no progress in this matter so far. It was okay to listen to it, so it was up to him not to accept it. Your Majesty is all ears. Li Yanchang said, actually, everyone tacitly understands who the person who can be defended by Marquis Xianping is. After all, he is a blood relative, but... Li Yanchang paused and continued, who said that Marquis Xianping only has one blood relative? Isn't there a closer one? Suyishan and Cao Hong looked at each other and saw that Li Yanchang had put down the curtain and left. Cao Hong said, Sir, I think this method is feasible. Although serious prisoners are not allowed to visit the prison, it is purely a dead horse being treated as a living horse doctor. It is better to let the young Marquis go to the prison to meet him. Everything is used in the trial, and threats have been used long ago. Suyishan's eyes were filled with worry. It's not a threat, Cao Hong said, let the father and son meet in person. Marquis Xianping may soften when he sees his precious son. Suyishan sighed, then let's try it. The carriage drove far away, and the driver asked in a low voice, Your Majesty, can those two people listen? The carriage turned a corner at the end of Palace Lane. Li Yanchang lifted the curtain and took a look, just in time to see the backs of Suyishan and Cao Hong turning around and leaving. If you didn't listen, those two people should follow you into the palace now. It's really not easy, the driver said. Suyishan is guarding the criminal department like a Teton. The people in prison are all his cronies, and they can't talk to him at all. When Marquis Xianping saw Pei Chunli, he should have known that his mouth should not be shut too tightly. Li Yanchang said nonchalantly, I have to thank Anan for being such a good brother. The driver seemed a little excited. The prince's grand ambition is just around the corner. Asshole, Li Yanchang scolded, what kind of place is this? The driver lowered his head and said, this subordinate is at fault. Li Yanchang stepped out of the carriage and said, you are waiting here. There is no need to follow. Yes. The maids and chamberlains in the palace all need to be decent. The driver has a scar running through his face. With such an appearance, he would not dare to show his face in front of the emperor. Li Yanchang went to pay his respects to Emperor Tongxiu. When he came out and was about to leave the palace, he saw Shizhi approaching. Li Yanchang stopped and waited for a moment. Master Shi. Shen Yu, I've met the prince. Li Yanchang half squinted his eyes, and a smile flashed across his feminine face. Looking at the way Mr. Shi is dressed, it's really worth it. Thank you for your concern, Your Majesty. I am preparing to go home, Shen Yu replied seriously. That's just right, Li Yanchang said with a smile. I also want to leave the palace, so I might as well give you a ride. Shen Yu looked at Li Yanchang quietly and said after a moment, okay, thank you King Qi. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince. Author, Zhiji. Chapter 180. Being courteous for nothing is either cheating or stealing, and besides, Shen Yu was sure that Li Yanchang had something to say. It was hot in summer, so Shen Yu sat near the door and opened the curtain on one side. After the carriage drove out of the imperial city, Shen Yu lowered the curtain and spoke. Your Highness, Prince Qi, isn't he afraid that others will think that you and I are very close friends? You opened the curtain in the palace just now, didn't you just hope that everyone would think so? Li Yanchang said. Shen Yu said, didn't King Qi also acquiesce in the despicable behavior? Yes, Li Yanchang smiled, leaned closer, and said flirtatiously, it's better to be closer. I think we can be closer. What do you think? Shen Yu's eyebrows were calm. Let's get down to business, King Qi. Li Yanchang clicked his tongue twice. This is business. As soon as she finished speaking, she saw her preparing to get out of the car. Wait a minute, Li Yanchang put down his frivolous expression. How do you think about the conditions I negotiated at the hunting ground last time? Shen Yu leaned against the wall of the car. I have thought about it. Now that I am a popular person in front of His Majesty, I am afraid that His Highness King Qi's sincerity is not enough. You are now a new rich man in Shengjing, but you were once an emperor and a courtier, Li Yanchang said dangerously. How long can this new rich man be more noble? Even if you are looking for a new wife, it should be the prince. Li Yanchang laughed out loud, and then said after laughing enough, you walk around in front of His Majesty all day long, and you only get much more information than I do. Can't you understand what the situation is now? Shen Yu said, the day when Marquis Xianping didn't speak, the prince took his seat in the East Palace. Can't you? Li Yanchang said, the king's heart is unpredictable. Shen Yu lowered her head and looked thoughtful. Hearing that King Qi is so sure, what are you going to do to pull him down? In other words, how are you going to get Marquis Xianping to speak? Li Yanchang said, you don't have to worry about this. You just say whether you are willing or not. Then it depends on what conditions Wang Kai can afford. Li Yanchang's feminine face was full of evil. What I have, of course you have a share. If you want the other side of my bed, I will agree to it. Stop the car, Shen Yu said calmly. Before getting out of the carriage, she turned back and said, you have to hurry up. Li Yanchang was wary. Why? Shen Yu glanced sideways at Li Yanchang. Don't you smell it? The incense in His Majesty's bedroom is getting stronger. Shen Yu jumped off the carriage in the busy city, watched the carriage disappear, and turned into an alley. Li Yanchang said, when I entered the palace today, the incense in the bedroom was indeed stronger again, but it still couldn't cover up the smell of the medicine. It should be that the imperial doctor increased the dosage of medicine. Your Majesty, are this woman's words credible? Scarface asked. Li Yanchang lost his frivolity and his eyes were full of sullenness. This king is holding her lifeline. I can't believe it or not believe it. Go and do something for me, Li Yanchang said. Scarface said, Your Majesty, please give me your instructions. Send someone to keep an eye on Balan Palace. I want to see if they really have a falling out. Scarface, yes. The punishment department was as solid as gold. Marquis Xianping lay on the hard wooden bed, staring at the wall in a daze. The walls are very dirty. The penal department prison has existed for hundreds of years and has been repaired and strengthened several times, but traces of the previous generations are still left. There were suicide notes that had not been scraped clean, there were bald walls where prisoners had dug them out, and there were even blood stains. The footsteps stopped at the door of the prison, and Marquis Xianping showed no reaction. He knew that he would go through this process every day, and the jailer would come and ask him if he wanted to speak. After waiting for a long time, I didn't hear any familiar words, but I heard a small sobbing sound. When Marquis Xianping heard the voice, he was suddenly startled. "Anan." He stood up and suddenly stumbled towards the door. "Why are you here?" "Dad," Pei Chunli cried loudly. Pei Chunli didn't expect to see his father in such a mess. He had been like the sky since he was a child, but the sky collapsed so suddenly that he was caught off guard and didn't know what to do next. Marquis Xianping held his hand and said, "Dad, it's okay. Why have you lost so much weight?" Pei Chunli wiped his tears. "Dad, what happened?" "They all said that Dad was the mastermind of the Yan Liangwen case, and it was you who killed so many soldiers." "Do you believe it?" Xianping Hao asked. "I don't believe it," Pei Chunli cried. "You taught me not to soil myself." "I don't believe it." Marquis Xianping burst into tears. "Then don't believe it?" "At least in his son's heart, he is still clean," Xianping Hao said in his heart. "Visitors are not allowed in the prison. How did you get in?" Xianping Hao asked. Pei Chunli wiped his tears and said, "Master Su asked me to come." Marquis Xianping had a thought. Su Yishan definitely wanted Pei Chunli to persuade him to confess as soon as possible, but once he confessed, his days would be numbered. "This place is unlucky. You should go back after seeing me," Marquis Xianping said. Pei Chunli started crying again. "I finally got in. Oh, by the way, King Qi asked me to bring a message." Marquis Xianping's hands shook slightly and he asked hurriedly, "What did he say?" "He said the prince was stupid and asked you not to protect him anymore," Pei Chunli said. "King Qi said he would find a way to protect you and not let our family collapse." Marquis Xianping was stunned for a moment, his eyes flickered a few times, and his legs went weak as if he had lost all strength. Pei Chunli put his arm through the railing and hurriedly supported him. "Dad, are you okay?" "No, it's nothing." Xianping Hao's eyes were dull, and after a while he fixed his gaze on Pei Chunli's face. "Anan, go back." Pei Chunli said, "Dad, when can you go home?" It should be soon." Xianping Hao was evasive. Pei Chunli nodded happily. "Well, I'll go back first. I'll wait for you at home. I will definitely listen to you and study hard in the future." Marquis Xianping clapped his hand and said, "Well, go ahead." Pei Chunli let go of his hand, but was suddenly held back by Marquis Xianping. "Anan, you, remember to eat well and study well." Pei Chunli nodded, feeling something was wrong. "Dad. Wait for Dad to come out and check your homework." Pei Chunli laughed and nodded with tears in his eyes. "Okay." Seeing Pei Chunli's back disappear, Marquis Xianping slowly backed away and finally sat on the hard bed. "Okay, what a plan, ha 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 ha." Marquis Xianping laughed so hard. "What a good plan, even I was included in it." The jailer listened for a long time and saw that Marquis Xianping looked like he was going crazy. "Why are you laughing? It's time to speak." Marquis Xianping laughed so hard that his old laughter echoed in the cell. At the end of his laughter, he raised his head, but his face was filled with tears. "Here, I'll do it. Here, bring a pen and paper." Pei Chunli walked out of the prison and felt a few drops of water fall on his face. He raised his head and looked at the sky. "It's raining." You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 181. It's raining, Shen Yu said, lying on the window. Xieting Zhou reached out from her to close the window and said warmly, "It's time to sleep." In this inconspicuous house, listening to the sound of rain outside the window becoming more and more intensive, they lay down with their clothes on, sleeping on the same bed, and they were the most compatible souls sticking together. Xieting Zhou saw her eyes open in the darkness. "Can't you sleep?" Xieting Zhou asked in a low voice. Shen Yu nodded slowly. She was a little afraid of sleeping. When she fell asleep recently, her dreams were filled with Xieting Zhou's bloody figure. Xieting Zhou pressed his cheek against hers. "You've been having nightmares lately, and sometimes you call my name. What did you dream about?" Shen Yu turned her head and buried herself in his arms. "I dreamed of Yan Liang Pass. This is the best way to stop the topic. Yan Liang Pass is the pain buried in her soul that she can never let go." As expected, Xieting Zhou stopped talking and kissed her on the temple. "Go to sleep. I'll wake you up if you have a nightmare." Shen Yu closed her eyes obediently, but heard a footsteps that did not belong to the night in the sound of rain. Xieting Zhou raised his hand to his lips, got out of bed quietly, and grabbed Yanfeng from the knife rest. The footsteps got closer and closer, and finally stopped at the door. Under the lightning, a shadow fell on the door. "Are you the person outside the door?" asked. "Are you asleep?" Xieting Zhou was stunned, and turned around to see Shen Yu getting up from the bed in a panic like a catapult. "It's my brother, what should I do?" she asked silently. Xieting Zhou walked over and whispered, "Your brother will know sooner or later. You continue to sleep and leave the rest to me. My brother will beat you up." "It doesn't matter if you get beaten up for grabbing his cabbage." Xieting Zhou asked her to lie down and put down the bed curtain. Shen Zhao put his ear against the window. He seemed to hear someone speaking, but he was not sure because of the thunder. "Are you?" Shen Zhao shouted again. "I thought it was strange. I couldn't sleep when there was thunder in the past, but tonight the thunder almost hit my head. Why am I still sleeping so deeply?" Shen Yu was indeed afraid of thunder, but that happened in her previous life. Living alone in the world, she had to learn to be strong. Shen Zhao didn't hear the reply and was about to leave when the door suddenly opened. One was wearing pajamas and the other was wearing a bamboo hat. The two looked at each other in the bright light of lightning. Shen Zhao seemed to be frozen, and then was shaken awake by a crack of thunder. "Where's Au?" Shen Zhao's face turned pale. "Sleeping," Xieting Zhou said calmly. "She hasn't been sleeping well recently. Let's go talk elsewhere." Shen Zhao clenched his fist tightly, as if the fist would fall on Xieting Zhou's face the next moment. Xieting Zhou closed the door and walked towards the side room. After entering the house, he lit the lamp, turned around and said, "Brother." There was already a sound of wind blowing in his ears. Xieting Zhou could obviously avoid it, but he took the punch forcefully and was hit by Shen Zhao, causing his head to turn sideways. The force was so strong that Xieting Zhou's ears rang for a moment. Shen Zhao grabbed his collar again and said word by word, "Thank you, Yun, you thought there was no one in the Shen family and you bullied my sister. How dare you, how dare you?" His hands were shaking violently, and he punched Xieting Zhou on the jaw again with his backhand. The smell of blood emerged from Xieting Zhou's mouth. "I won't defend myself," he said. "I love Au." "You love her?" Shen Zhao was furious. "If you love her, you should respect her, but you have an unmatched relationship with her like this. What a humming love. This word is too much." Xieting Zhou pulled away the hand holding his collar in displeasure and said, "Brother can scold me, but dash." "Shut up." Shen Zhao threw away his bamboo hat and said angrily, "You have no right to call me big brother." Xieting Zhou continued, "Brother, it's okay to scold me, but don't look down on your sister. The word just used on her and me is just looking down on her." Shen Zhao shouted, if you didn't despise her, why would you be in her room tonight? I can't help myself. I can't be at ease if I can't see her, Xie Tingzhou said seriously, but I also respect her. Although she has agreed to my marriage proposal, I also swore on my father-in-law's grave that I would marry her. I will protect her for the rest of my life, but I will not cross the line until we officially get married. After hearing what he said, Shen Zhao's anger faded a little, but only a little. I'm telling you, he sneered, I realized something was wrong that day. Tell me, did you threaten her with revenge? Is she the kind of person who can be coerced by others? Xie Tingzhou asked. Shen Zhao was so angry that he was pacing back and forth. His anger had nowhere to vent, and he kicked over a chair with his feet. Don't even think about it, he looked at Xie Tingzhou gloomily, don't think about marrying my sister away from me easily. Xie Tingzhou knew that when it came to talking to Shen Zhao, he must not use the trick of calculating people's hearts. What he had to rely on was sincerity. I never thought it would be easy, he said calmly, marrying her has never been easy. Brother, I don't know how much I have paid along the way. It doesn't matter. I will see you in the future. In fact, I am happy for the punch I received tonight. Yes, it means you love her, and there is another person in the world who loves her. Shen Zhao was so angry that his forehead ached with anger. He pulled up a chair and sat down. She didn't sleep at all. Even if she did, she should have woken up due to such a big movement. She knew she had done something wrong. Don't you dare come to see me. Xie Tingzhou said, I don't think she did anything wrong. It's not that she didn't come, but that I didn't let her come. Brother is angry. If you have any anger, you can take it out on me. I thank Tingzhou for taking care of the order accepted, but Au can't. Xie Tingzhou looked at the water in the courtyard and said softly, she has suffered so much along the way. I don't want her to suffer at all. If you see her, maybe you will give her a good scolding, and she will not agree with you talk back, but she will feel uncomfortable. You are a very important person to her, and any words you say are very important to her, including scolding. Shen Zhao's heart calmed down a little. Hearing Xie Tingzhou talk about how painful her journey was, he was heartbroken. Xie Tingzhou picked up the chair that fell on the ground, picked up the bamboo hat, and said, to me, she is my only wife in Xie Tingzhou's life, but to me, you are just his brother, I don't would let anyone hurt her. He looked over calmly and said, including you. Shen Zhao saw the danger warning in Xie Tingzhou's eyes. It was the look of a raptor protecting its cubs, and it was Xie Tingzhou's determination to take Shen Yu under his wing. Shen Zhao was surprisingly not angry, thank you Tingzhou, the days are still long. He pointed to his eyes, I'll keep an eye on you. When Shen Zhao was about to leave, Xie Tingzhou saw him off with a lantern. It rained heavily, and there was a lot of rain splashing on the porch. Xie Tingzhou was walking in front wearing a loose robe, while Shen Zhao was watching from behind, thinking that his grace was truly peerless and independent, and I'm afraid there would never be another person like him in this world. But anyway, no one is worthy of my Au. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince author, Gigi. Chapter 183. Li Jinqing didn't seem to believe it. He looked at her carefully and was about to speak when the palace door opened. Su Yishan came out and said, Your Majesty, please enter the palace. Okay, here you go. Li Jinqing tidied his clothes, made sure he was fine, and entered the palace nervously. As soon as he entered the door, a glass lamp flew over, but due to lack of strength, it flew into the air and fell to the ground. Son, Tongxiu's eyes were as angry as fire. Father, please calm down. Li Jinqing's legs softened and he knelt on the ground. Father, please take care of your dragon body. Emperor Tongxiu gasped violently, humming like a broken bellows, You wish that I would die soon, so that the great Zhou dynasty could fall into your hands and let you do whatever you want. Li Jinqing was stunned. Father, I don't know why my father is so angry. If I do something bad, my father can scold me, but don't hurt the dragon's body. Emperor Tongxiu's old eyes were full of anger. Do you think I am really hopelessly stupid? Li Jinqing said, my son doesn't understand what my father means, so I ask my father to make it clear. How did you get your palace and the concubines in your palace? Emperor Tongxiu asked. Li Jinqing's face suddenly turned pale. My son, my son. Emperor Tongxiu asked, Li Jinqing, do you know what it means when I give you the word Jinqing? Li Jinqing kowtowed deeply. I know that my father has high hopes for me. You are greedy for pleasure, addicted to beauty, and form cliques for selfish interests. One after another, your virtue is not worthy of you. If I hand over the kingdom of Zhou dynasty to you, then I will be ashamed of my ancestors. Emperor Tongxiu picked up an object and threw it at him. Li Jinqing did not dare to hide. The inkstone hit him hard on the head, and he gritted his teeth to bear it, and soon a stream of blood flowed from his forehead. Father, Li Jinqing cried, I know I was wrong. Emperor Tongxiu was furious. Ji Liangji pointed out that you had misappropriated funds for building river embankments before his death. I held it back because I thought you were not rotten to the core. I didn't expect you. Emperor Tongxiu was so angry that he couldn't speak. After calming down for a moment, he said, I didn't expect that you would collude with Marquis Xianping and empty out the southwest granary. Li Jinqing suddenly raised his head and said, Father, I have been wronged. I have never touched the southwest granary. Emperor Tongxiu sneered, during the Yan Liangwen War, you were worried that your traces would be exposed, so you decided to focus on military rations. Should I be happy? My good sons, Liangji Unfang and Ji Liangji are all your scapegoats. Father Li Jinqing walked over and hugged Emperor Tongxiu's leg. There must be something hidden in this case. I have never done anything like this. With a crash, Emperor Tongxiu threw away the things on the table. Don't tell me that all this was done by him, Marquis Xianping. My son, I did take money from the Ministry of Household Affairs, Li Jinqing said sadly. My son, I have never heard of stealing grain and transporting food. Please believe me, father. Emperor Tongxiu kicked Li Jinqing in the chest. He was so weak that he couldn't lift up, but he still kicked the prince to the ground. With a swish, Emperor Tongxiu grabbed the confession on the table and threw it in Li Jinqing's face. Please give me a closer look. Li Jinqing panicked and grabbed the thin pieces of paper and scanned them quickly. The further he looked back, the paler his face became. The blood flowing from his forehead had solidified on his face, making him look even more terrifying. No, this isn't right. Li Jinqing quickly flipped through the confession. This is a frame-up. It's a frame-up. He looked at Emperor Tongxiu and said, Father, someone wants my son to die. It's not that someone wants you to die, Emperor Tongxiu said sternly, it's you who wants the great Zhou dynasty to perish. Marquis Xianping is your uncle. In order for you to secure your position as crown prince, you have no idea how much force he has used behind your back to secure your position as crown prince, don't I know? He, Marquis Xianping, suffered in prison for a month without speaking, just to protect you. If it weren't for Pei Chunli's persuasion, I would have been kept in the dark by you. Li Jinqing couldn't accept this fact at all. He said with tears in his eyes, I will recognize what I have done. I will not recognize what I have not done even if I die. Then you will die to prove your ambition. Emperor Tongxiu was so angry that he couldn't hold back his words. His voice seemed to have aged a few years. I am ashamed of my ancestors and of Great Zhou. Great Zhou cannot be left in the hands of people like you. Father, Li Jinqing was shocked. My father, please give me a chance. I really have never done this before. Opportunity, Emperor Tongxiu said, if I give you a chance, where will the opportunity come from in the great Zhou dynasty? and where will the opportunity come from for the millions of refugees? It's written in black and white, and there's no room for your quibbles. Emperor Tongxue said, "Here comes someone." Shen Yu walked into the palace and said, "I'm here." Immediately take Li Jinqing into custody at the clan residence. He is not allowed to enter or leave without authorization. He will be judged after the case is concluded. Yes. Come here and prepare an edict. Emperor Tongxue coughed violently, and there was immediately a trace of blood on his handkerchief. He threw it aside and said with a deep breath, "We are going to abolish the prince's edict. I inherit the great legacy of my ancestors and strive to maintain order in the world. The prince inherits the lawless virtues of his ancestors and does not follow my instructions. He specializes in authority and gathers party members to do whatever he wants, but does whatever he wants." Puff. A mouthful of blood spurted out from Emperor Tongxue's mouth and splashed on the edict. It was daybreak, but there were still dark clouds, like a lingering haze, shrouding this prosperous capital city. The Jiaofang secretary opened the door and saw the person knocking on the door wearing a python robe. He quickly said respectfully, "Hey, it's you, sir. Why are you here so early today? It's still early in the day? Among us. I'm looking for someone." Shen Yu interrupted him. "Are you still looking for Fueyao?" She. Shen Yu used the scabbard to push the person aside and walk straight into the Jiaofang department. More than a month after Suan Pinghao was arrested, she came to Jiaofangsi several times to find Fueyao. Xieting Zhou was right. Fueyao seemed unreliable, but Ji Liangji did not choose the wrong person. She had not been able to get the account books out even though she had tried to coerce and induce him. Now that the overall situation has been decided, the prince can no longer stand up, those people will get the punishment they deserve, and 100,000 soldiers should be able to rest in peace. The ledger was just the icing on the cake. She wanted to clear away the fog and let all the secrets come to light. Fueyao served tea and knelt down beside him. "My lord has been here 6 or 7 times. Shen Yu picked up the teacup and said, "I hope this is the last time. My lord saved me that night." Fueyao is very grateful. Fueyao smiled, "But several lives of the GE family are tied to the ledger, and I can't take risks." Shen Yu stared at her closely. "The emperor has ordered the imprisonment of the prince. Now that the threat to you has been resolved, the ledger is of no use to you." Fueyao seemed stunned for a moment. Warm reminder, if you find that clicking the next page will force you to jump to other websites, please use the chapter error or contact us at the bottom to inform us. We will handle it as soon as possible. Thank you for your understanding. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 185. The imperial edict from the deposed prince caused dramatic changes in the court. Although Xieting's whose face was injured, he went to court as usual. Whenever his colleagues asked, he would confess that he was beaten by his brother for stealing fragrance and jade. In the past 2 days, the atmosphere in both the court and the palace was extremely depressed. The officials did not dare to make trouble at this juncture, and therefore did not dare to impeach Xieting Zhou. The throne was empty, and the courtiers were busy writing documents. There were 2 piles on Emperor Tongxue's desk. One pile was for his supporter of Qin King Li Zhaonian, and the other pile was for the memorial to make King Qi the crown prince. Qi King Li Yanchang, who was once out of reach of the throne, seems to have the ability to compete after the former prince Li Jinqing was eliminated. Emperor Tongxue's eyes were sunken and he looked haggard, but he still leaned on the desk. This incompetent emperor, who has no clothes and no food, is standing on his last duty, as if he wants to live up to the word dedicated to the best of his ability. Your Majesty. Defu stepped forward to persuade, "It's time to rest." Emperor Tongxue said turned his head and glanced at the sky, and said, "Please hold the lamp." The palace maid entered the palace, and the lamps were lit in Han's Hang Palace. Emperor Tongxiu looked at it for a moment, his eyes began to blur, and he couldn't see the words clearly. He leaned back on the dragon chair and said after a while, "Where is Shijer? Call her in." Defio, yes. Shen Yu entered the palace and said, "Your Majesty. Come here." Yes, Shen Yu came closer and met Emperor Tongxiu's turbid eyes. He was born well. Emperor Tongxiu looked at it for a while before saying. Shen Yu's expression did not change, but she began to feel uneasy because of this inexplicable sentence. Emperor Tongxiu said, "Come and read the memorial for me." Shen Yu was startled and knelt down on one knee, "Your Majesty." Defu was also shocked, but did not dare to speak. "Get up," Emperor Tongxiu said, "I didn't ask you to kneel." Shen Yu stood up and said, "I am the imperial guard in front of the palace. I dare not interfere in the affairs of the state." Emperor Tongxiu said leisurely, "My eyes are not working anymore, but I don't use my eyes to see people. You read the book for me." Shen Yu and Defu both understood that this sentence meant trust. Defu was secretly shocked. This kind of honor was truly unprecedented. If it weren't for Emperor Tongxiu's sunset, why worry about not being able to become a supreme minister in the future? Such a pity. It's a pity that there has always been one emperor and one courtier. Who knows what will happen after the new emperor succeeds to the throne? Even Defu himself has to start thinking of ways to find a new career. Shen Yu stepped forward and saw that the cup on the table contained not tea, but ginseng slices soaked in the slightly yellow water. Has it reached this point? She thinks. Shen Yu was about to read the memorial, and Defu hurriedly left Hanshang Hall. The sound of the memorial being read in an upright tone rang out in the hall. Emperor Tongxiu closed his eyes and always made comments after Shen Yu finished reading a memorial. Emperor Tongxiu half closed his eyes, as if he was about to fall asleep. He remembered the last long talk he had with Shenzhongan, which was a few days before the war started in Yanliang Pass. He said, "You praise your daughter with me all the time. Your daughter is so good, why not become my daughter-in-law? It will also fulfill our relationship as king and minister." "That can't be done," Shenzhongan immediately objected. He said, "My girl is very wild and doesn't like being detained in Shengjing. If her temperament enters the palace, she will not cause you any chaos. It's all because of your habit." Emperor Tongxiu drank tea, "Leave it to me and I will control it for you." "Which son of yours is suitable?" Shenzhongan asked. "All the successful people are married, but my daughter will not be a concubine." Emperor Tongxiu thought for a long time, but he really couldn't find any candidates. Those who were not married might not be worthy of the beautiful little girl. Shenzhongan smiled heartily, "No, don't think about it. A child without a mother needs to be pampered, and she is a girl, so just let her be." Zhong and Emperor Tongxiu suddenly said, "Although I am more than 10 years older than you, you can't see it through. I have been restrained by Dezhou and trapped myself. Now my health is getting worse day by day, I will definitely go ahead of you." The topic suddenly became serious. Shenzhongan said, "Your Majesty said this." Emperor Tongxiu interrupted him, "I was born in the royal family, and my flesh and blood ties are indifferent. Brotherhood may be a killer. You are the only one. Only you can I have a good talk with you." Emperor Tongxiu did not claim to be me in front of him. "I can't hold it on any longer. If I take the first step someday, you can protect the kingdom of Zhou for me," he said. However, the person he was willing to entrust his country to had taken a step ahead of him and died in the hands of his son. The last national pillar of the great Zhou dynasty fell in the cold wind and snow of Yanliang Pass. Tears dripped from the corners of his wrinkled eyes and disappeared into his grey temples. He didn't know whether he was crying for his lost friends or his crumbling country. "Your Majesty, this letter is from the Ministry of Rites." Shen Yu paused. Emperor Tongxiu asked, "Why don't you continue reading?" Shen Yu said, "The former prince, no, Li Jinjinj wrote a letter of guilt and it was included in it." Emperor Tongxiu opened his eyes, give it to me. He secretly wiped the corners of his eyes with his sleeve, and the vague weakness in his eyes disappeared. Emperor Tongxue sat up and took the sinner's letter, give me the candlestick. Shen Yu took the candlestick. The eloquent and sinful book with several thousand words burned in the hands of Emperor Tongxue. He looked at Shen Yu in the firelight, and seemed to be looking at another person through her. Emperor Tongxue murmured, this is my first explanation to Shen's Hongan. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 186. Perhaps Emperor Tongxue was worried that he was soft-hearted, or he was really disappointed. Emperor Tongxue did not read a single word of the thousands-word letter to himself. Just like that, it burned out in that old hand, as if even the temperature of the flame could not be detected. None of this matters anymore. The highest place in the Forbidden Palace is called Jiangzi Pavilion, which means auspiciousness descends from the sky and purple energy comes from the east. Jiangzi Pavilion is 99 feet high. Standing on the high place, the whole view of Shengjing can be seen. Shen Yu stood upstairs, but she didn't feel like the dust had settled in her heart at all. She missed her father and Yan Liangguan. But even though she was standing so high, she still couldn't see Yan Liang pass, and she couldn't even tell which mansion was Shen's mansion. Balin Prince's mansion is over there, someone suddenly said in the darkness. Who? Shen Yu shouted sharply and pressed Yin Feng on her waist. She stood here for so long without noticing anyone. There was a rustling sound in the darkness, and a figure sat upright next to King Wu beside the fence. Shen Yu took a closer look and immediately bowed and saluted, Your Majesty. No courtesy. Li Zhaonian stood up and walked over. A faint smell of alcohol came with the wind. Over there, he raised his hand and pointed in a direction and said, That's the Balin Palace. Shen Yu knew that Li Zhaonian knew that she was a daughter, but she had never used it to threaten her, or even had a conversation with her. The meeting was just a routine courtesy. Do you want to leave the palace? Li Zhaonian asked. Shen Yu said, Back to the prince, I don't mean to be humble. Li Zhaonian didn't seem to care about her answer. He looked at her and smiled, leaning on the railing and sticking his head out. The wind surged from Jiangzi Pavilion, blowing his hair all over the sky. I also want to fly out. He looked into the distance and said, I once thought that it would be great if I was not born in the royal family. I could travel around the world and visit tourist attractions. But then I thought about it, if I hadn't been born into the royal family, I would have been born into troubled times. It might be difficult to even have a full stomach. You see, everyone in this world is in a dilemma. He reached too far, and Shen Yu was afraid that he would fall, so she reminded him, Your Majesty, it's windy here, so it's better to go back and rest. Li Zhaonian seemed to be really drunk. He looked back at her with a confused look in his eyes. Oh, I'm fine. Shen Yu thought for a while, then turned around and prepared to go downstairs to call someone. Don't go, Li Zhaonian said, I won't dance. He sat back on King Wu's bed, looked at Shen Yu and said, The weather is going to change. You should leave as quickly as possible. The further away the better. Shen Yu's heart skipped a beat, wondering if Li Zhaonian meant something. The crown prince has not yet been established, and now Qin King Li Zhaonian and Qi King Li Yanchang are fighting in separate courts. Li Zhaonian clearly had no idea about the throne, but he was pushed to that position by everyone. A common drama in the rotation of the old and the new is that the parties are united against the different parties and counterattack. Perhaps he had foreseen the fight that would follow. Shiger Li Zhaoyang shouted softly. Shen Yu, the humble position is here. Li Zhaonian looked into the distance. This mountain and river is too heavy. Whether it rises or falls, everything is determined. You, Don't get sucked into this whirlpool. Shen Yu took a gentle breath, and she was convinced that Li Zhaonian was asking her to save her life. Whether she was telling the truth while drunk or not, she should be grateful for the reminder. She recalled what she heard from Emperor Tongxue when she sneaked into the palace that night. He said that if he had been born in the year of Taiping, he would have become a good emperor. But such a person as bright as the breeze was born in the wrong place. Shen Yu said, "Where is the prince? Isn't the prince leaving?" "I can't leave," Li Zhaonian said with a smile. "I was born in the royal family, and I have been unable to control myself since I was born. I am already in a whirlpool and can't get out." Li Zhaonian flicked his sleeves and the wine bottle that King Wu was leaning on fell to the ground. He stood up and went downstairs. He walked to the steps and turned back. "You must remember what I said." Shen Yu was sitting on the Jiangzi pavilion. She remembered the direction Li Zhaonian pointed just now. She saw Bailin Palace in that direction. It has been nearly a month since she wrote to Bailin, but there has been no movement or reply. I wonder if King Bailin received her letter. Could it have been intercepted by Xietingzhou? She immediately gave up the idea. If the letter was intercepted by Xietingzhou, it would not be as calm as it is now, and she might get very angry. Shen Yu sat in Jiangzi Pavilion all night, and then came down from upstairs when the sky was bright. The palace people who were coming and going in the palace alley were so busy that they stepped aside and saluted when Shen Yu passed by. "Lord Yahao." Yeah, Shen Yu took a look and said, "With so many things, what are you giving away?" As the chief minister in front of the palace, the safety of the Forbidden Palace is her life, so she needs to pay attention to any movement. The eunuch said, "My lord, in a few days it will be the Wanqiao festival. These are all prepared for the Wanqiao banquet." "It's Wanqiao festival," Shen Yu murmured. It turns out that the longevity festival is approaching, and there is no doubt that this should be the last longevity banquet for Emperor Tongxue. No wonder local officials have come to Beijing one after another, and she has been so busy these days that she has forgotten about it. The Forbidden Palace, which had been depressed for half a month, became lively on the day of the longevity banquet. Emperor Tongxue was wearing a crown robe, which made him much more energetic than when he was sitting at his desk under the lamp every night. "Let's have a party." Emperor Tongxue seemed to have a happy look on his face. Shen Yu knew why. He had just decided on the candidate for the crown prince last night. Shao music played in the palace, and the eunuchs and maids began to pass the dishes around. "Look at Shizhi," Li Jiafeng said, "standing in front of my father, he is indeed quite imposing." Xietingzhou raised his eyes while holding the cup. Shen Yu's eyes happened to sweep over him. She only stayed on him for a moment and then quickly moved away. Half an hour later, Shen Yu changed her shift and went to the cleaning room. As soon as she walked out of the cleaning room, she stretched out a hand and took her into the side room. Shen Yu didn't hide because she smelled Xietingzhou's scent in the alcohol, so she lowered her voice and said, "You're being ridiculous. I miss you so much." Xietingzhou stared into her eyes. "You haven't left the palace for 3 days." Shen Yu explained, "The longevity banquet needs to be scheduled, and the palace defenses need to be adjusted. I'm too busy, so I can go back tonight." "It's useless to go back." Xietingzhou suddenly paused and heard someone passing by outside the door. He waited until the person was far away before continuing, "Your brother will be watching you when you go back, and you can't even touch him with a finger." Shen Yu stepped up and whispered in his ear, "There's a long way to go. It's not easy to convince my brother." Her ears were numbed by her faint breath. Xietingzhou turned his head and kissed her temples. He didn't dare to let himself kiss her, fearing that someone would notice something strange when she went out later. Shen Yu still had to be on duty and couldn't leave for too long. She left first and returned to the banquet after about half a stick of incense. Halfway through the banquet, Emperor Tongxue was already a little out of his mind. The bell buzzed, and before the lingering sound disappeared, all the officials at the table fell silent, all looking at the dragon throne in eager anticipation. Emperor Tongxue said in the lingering sound, "Declare the decree." "Yes, Your Majesty." Defu took out a bright yellow imperial edict. All the officials knelt down, lying on the ground. They had foreseen that this edict meant that Zhou dynasty would appoint the next prince. Everyone's hearts were aroused, wondering who could become the common master of the world, King Qin or King Qi. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 187. Wow! The furnishings in the room were shattered all over the floor. King Qi was still angry. He grabbed the bogarak and tried to overturn it but failed. He raised his hand and grabbed a porcelain bottle and smashed it to the ground. The attendants and maids were kneeling on the floor inside and outside the house. "Get out! Get out of here!" King Qi threw another piece of porcelain without caring about its value. The maid and the boy left happily, and no one dared to approach the study again. Li Yanchang was so angry that his mind was in a daze. His eyes suddenly became bright and dark, and his arms resting on the table were shaking slightly. "Why?" he gritted his teeth and said, "Why?" He raised his hand and flipped the pen holder over. "How can I not compare with him, Li Zhaonian? Ah! Tell me, how can I not compare with him?" Scarface stood aside and didn't dare to speak. "The fourth child only knows how to write and write. Does he know how to govern a country? Why is it that I am better than others in everything, but he never looks at me? Bang! Aren't my poems outstanding enough?" But what did he say? He said I was eager for quick success and easy to get messed up by. My martial arts skills are not better than those of other princes. But he said that the emperor should control people rather than carry swords. No matter what I do, he's not satisfied. Li Yanchang gritted his teeth. He favors the boss and the fourth child. Even the loser Li Jiefeng is his pet peeve. What about me? Who am I? Li Yanchang stumbled forward, staring closely at Scarface. "Gan Gong, you have been with me for so many years, do you think I am really not as good as them?" Gan Gong said, "Your Majesty, the outcome is still uncertain. We have been planning for many years. Aren't we just trying to win?" Li Yanchang was stunned for a moment, then suddenly laughed. "Yes, if he doesn't give it to me, I will fight for it myself, but..." His smile faded again, "But I really want to get his approval." Li Yanchang slowly fell to the ground, his clothes were messed up. "I really respect and love him as a father," he cried and laughed at the same time. "I don't want this," he murmured to himself, "I don't want this, it's all you who forced me." Those red eyes gradually became sharp. "Since he treated me like this, don't blame me, Gan Gong, just act as planned." Gan Gong's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Yes, Your Majesty." Several horses were shuttled through the streets, turning the corner and galloping towards the north towards the palace. 11 Feng jumped off his horse in front of the palace gate. "Is the prince in the courtyard?" "Not here," said the concierge. 11 Feng turned over and got on the horse again. He knew where the prince was. In the past few days, Li Jinqing has written several sinners in succession, but Emperor Tongxue didn't read it. Shen Yu first poured tea for Shen Zhao, and then handed the second cup to Xieting Zhou. Except for the first few days when he burned it himself, Defu burned it directly afterwards. "He is determined," Shen Zhao said, "it will save us a lot of trouble. Ayu, as soon as the matter is over, you come with me." Shen Yu glanced at Xieting Zhou quietly. "See what he is doing." Her actions did not escape Shen Zhao's eyes. "You are my sister, not from his northern palace." Shen Yu didn't dare to answer. No matter what she said, she would offend someone. Xieting Zhou was sipping tea, and the calm expression on his face made Shen Zhao unhappy. Shen Zhao said, "Let me tell you the truth, he can't get out of Shengjing. No matter who sits on the dragon chair, Xieting Zhou can't get out. You won't spend time here with him, right?" Brother Shen Yu finally couldn't help but speak. This is not pleasant to hear, but it is also true, Shen Zhao said. Look who dares to let him go. Master Zifeng's voice suddenly sounded outside the courtyard. Xieting Zhou stood up and walked to the door, just as 11 Feng rushed in from outside the courtyard. It's the account book. My subordinate came back with the account book. Zifeng gasped and took out an account book wrapped in oil paper from his chest and presented it to him. He rushed to Jianzhou day and night for half a month, and killed 3 horses running back and forth. The weather was hot, and he still smelled of sweat. He stepped back after presenting his account book, not daring to come forward. Go down, you've worked hard these past 2 months, Xieting Zhou said. Zifeng, Your Highness, you'd better take a quick look. Xieting Zhou frowned slightly, opened the account book, and Shen Yu stepped forward. After flipping through a few pages, he closed the account book and handed it to Shen Yu, who was standing aside. The sun was very hot today. He squinted his eyes slightly, but suddenly he laughed sadly. It's so well hidden. Some people are playing tricks on us and using us as knives. Zifeng saw the dangerous aura in his eyes, which were exactly the same as those of Bai Yu and Kang when they saw their prey. That look was so sharp that 11 Feng had not seen it in Xieting Zhou's eyes for a long time. He lowered his head and did not dare to look again. He only heard the sound of the wind and the sound of Shen Yu flipping through the ledger. What's going on? Shen Zhao asked. Shen Yu squeezed the ledger tightly. Wrong, all wrong. Where did it all go wrong? She thought carefully. Ho Xianping. No one thought that the well-known Prince Sealing, Li Jinqing's uncle, would actually switch sides and put the blame on Li Jinqing. Shen Yu closed the account book and said in a deep voice, I want to go to the palace immediately. My horse is at the door, Zifeng said. Shen Yu nodded and said to Xieting Zhou, I will be back early tomorrow morning at the latest. Xieting Zhou warned carefully, bring a knife and be careful. Suan Hui Hall was silent, and the eunuchs and maids were kneeling on the ground, their foreheads pressed against the ground. The night was already deep, and Emperor Tongxiu was leaning on the couch and looking through his account books. This time, he didn't get angry as usual, as if he was used to receiving all kinds of unexpected news. Ahem. Emperor Tongxiu coughed, drank tea, and continued reading until he reached the last page and then slowly closed it. He opened his mouth, but seemed not to know what to say. He just lowered his head and asked, Do you think I am a failed emperor? Shen Yu didn't answer. He added, At least I am a failed father, my sons, well, wow. Emperor Tongxiu laughed, one is better than the other, cough cough cough. Haven't you read the booklet presented by the Ministry of Rights today? Yes, Shen Yu said. Eunuch Fu, please go and get it. Defio, yes. That's all. Emperor Tongxiu forced himself to stand up. I'll go by myself. Shen Yu followed Emperor Tongxiu through the palace corridor, and Emperor Tongxiu stopped in front of the imperial study. Shen Yu went into the palace and took out the book. She opened it with Emperor Tongxiu, but was stunned for a moment. Today, did Jinqing not submit a confession today? No. Emperor Tongxiu nodded. Then first. Report. A forbidden soldier rushed over and knelt in front of the majestic palace. Your Majesty. The former Prince Li Jinqing committed suicide in the clan mansion.